Your organisation is alive, but for centuries we have behaved as though organisations were machines. In Nature of Work, Paul Miller, CEO and founder of Digital Workplace Group, and Shimrit James, Director of Knowledge, draw on patterns from the natural world to provide change makers with the language and questions to evolve their workplaces from organisations to organisms. They explore 12 essential workplace elements such as health, habitat, regeneration, intelligence, relationships, and purpose, underpinned by real-life stories of organisations and people already on this journey to new ways of working. Changes in work have profound impacts on how we live, and Nature of Work equips us with the language to craft a new story of work for a living age. This is Nature of Work.
Hello there, and thank you for joining us today for the launch of Nature of Work, the new story of work for a living age. My name's Mark Katzlov. I'm director of Herman Miller's Insight Group, and I'm delighted to be hosting this event to talk about the innovative new book by Paul Miller and Shimrit James. Now, later in the event, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions, and you can do that by adding your questions in the YouTube comment section, and we will pick up as many as we can. But first of all, I'd like to introduce you to the authors of Nature of Work, Paul Miller and Shimrit James. We've got Paul and Shimrit here as well. Good to have you. How are you?
Great to be here.
And are you ready for this?
Yes.
Good. Looking forward to a great session. If you don't already know of Paul and Shimrit's work, Paul is a technology and social entrepreneur, and he's CEO and founder of Digital Workplace Group. His previous book includes The Digital Renaissance of Work, Delivering Digital Workplaces Fit for the Future. That was co-authored with Elizabeth Marsh, and it was shortlisted for the Management Book of the Year in 2016. And The Digital Workplace, How Technology is Liberating Work was one of his other books, and that helped to popularize the term digital workplace. Shimrit is Director of Knowledge for Digital Workplace Group and focuses on curating knowledge on the digital workplace for its members and clients, and they include Adobe, the Coca-Cola Company, Ubisoft, and UNHCR. She's worked with Paul and DWG colleagues on various initiatives, including co-hosting the 24-hour global digital experience, DWG24, of which I was pleased to be a small part. She's had a number of research papers published with DWG on topics such as organizational readiness and one of my favorite subjects, collaboration. So welcome, Paul and Shimrit, and congratulations on the publication of this amazing, innovative book. How does it feel to actually have that finished book in front of you?
For me, it's really surreal. My dad jokes I used to go to bed hugging books instead of teddy bears as a child. So the idea that I now have our own one is completely surreal and exciting.
Yeah, it's a relief. It's a pleasure. The thing that's giving me the most pleasure, I would say, at the moment, is that people often describe it as a beautiful book, and it's always nice to feel like you've been part of creating something beautiful.
And I would agree with that. It is indeed beautifully produced, some amazing images. But let's learn a little bit more about the book. Paul, if I could ask you first, what made you decide to write this book?
Well, partly because my partner Ali said about 2.5 years ago, I think it's time for another book. And my heart sank because having written a few books in the past, I know how much work these endeavors are. And I started thinking about what would be the book that would be the successor to The Digital Renaissance of Work, which was my previous book, and whether the next book was, if you like, another stage on the digital workplace journey, because the term digital workplace is something that I'd started using to describe the non-physical places where we work. And I think the language of digital workplace was useful to create that story of the technical spaces of work, which obviously we're all now in. But the next stage of it didn't feel like it was more digital. It wasn't more AI, more intelligence. I had one book that was going around my head, which was hyper digital and hyper physical, that the next stage of work would become more and more digital and more physical, which would have been quite interesting in the world we're in. But actually what happened to me was I spent an awful lot of time walking in nature with my dog Hector, and I'm often in fields and forests and trees and seeing the seasons, and actually on these walks I started kind of reflecting on the trees around me, the wind, the birds' song, the changes of temperature and seasons, and I thought this is a kind of visceral experience of nature. How different is an organization to this? If you like, the trees are part of a community, and organizations have people who are part of a community. And I started wondering about this idea, for instance, that the moisture in a forest is about the information flows, and the wind is part of the connection and so on. And then you look at the root system of a forest, and you start to realize that the roots of a forest influence the health of the forest. And what about if the root system of an organization, the parts of an organization that you can't see, they start to influence the health of the system? So, for example, if you think of organizations like Mindful Chef, which is one of the latest home delivery recipe companies, if you start to think of them as not a machine, but as a living system, you start to see that the roots of that system are rooted in, they're a net zero organization. For every meal that they sell, they give 2 meals back to poorer parts of the world. Their kind of culture is not visible, but is there. And I really started to feel this visceral sense that you could start to think of the organization not as the story of the organization as machine, which we've been going through since the industrial age, but the organization as a natural living system. And we've all had that experience, haven't we? Where you go into a particular place, a particular restaurant, or a company. The ones that come to mind for me are Adobe, IKEA, and you can feel the vitality of the organization. And you go into other places and somehow you can feel the kind of jarringness, the dysfunction. And I think that is because organizations are actually alive. Not that they can become alive, but they're all actually alive. And then Shimrit and I started kind of riffing on this idea, didn't we? Shimrit?
Yeah, absolutely. If I look back to the notes I was making back in April 2019 when we first started having this conversation, the idea of ecosystems, the idea of living forests, living systems, the idea of environmentalism were all there right at the beginning when we were first trying to explore what this idea of nature of work was. And it's, I think, both Paul and I as well, this idea of where did we first start to make comparisons between nature and work. Both of us were starting to feel much more strongly about being environmentally conscious, I think, so that seeped through. And a lot of the work that we'd been doing in Digital Workplace Group, where we were thinking about experience, about relationships, about organizational culture, moving not away from the digital workplace as a concept and a real thing, but trying to think through what is beyond that in terms of the physical workplace, how our relationship with the environment, and trying to think through those elements as well. and the framework of the digital workplace didn't give us the language we needed to explore those things. And so that, combined with climate change, combined with so many other things that came together, I think, meant that the idea of drawing inspiration from the world of nature just felt like excuse the pun, felt like a very natural thing to do. And there's a rich tradition of looking to nature for inspiration as well. We're not the first ones to say that the organisation is like an organism. There's a long, rich tradition of it. So it felt right, I think, for us to make those comparisons.
The other thing that happened, Cherie, wasn't it, was that we started thinking about this idea of the physicality of the book, not as, if you like, a typical business book, but we wanted to create something that was more of a coffee table book, you know, full of pictures of nature, so that even if you weren't interested in the subjects of where's the world of work going, even though in January 2021 everybody's interested in where's the world of work going, we really wanted the book itself to convey a different, the medium is the message. And as we started looking at this idea of the metaphor, not of the factory, but the metaphor of the forest, it seemed to kind of expand. You know, once you start to look at the idea of root systems, once you start to look at the idea of seasons thrown through an organization and life cycles, migration, it seemed to kind of expand and expand.
So when you were writing this book, who was the audience that you had in mind, and what did you expect them to get from the book? Cherie.
So it was fundamentally the idea of change makers came to us, the people who, at any level of an organisation, whether you're junior, whether you've just come in, whether you've been there for a long time and you're established and you're a leader, the idea that you feel deeply and strongly that the world of work as it's approached at the moment isn't working and that you want to see change. And so while we're hoping that leaders, executives, people in managerial positions, people with influence will pick this up and be inspired by it in order to approach the way in which they do their decision making and their strategy work as well differently as a result of this, I think one of the big additions for us was the idea that anyone can pick this up, whether you are in your early 20s and you're just entering the world of work, whether you're a freelancer in a music collective, for example, and want to rethink about the way that your network operates and works. So it's really people who want to be change, I think, within the world of work and try to start to improve the way in which organisations and collectives work and operate for the people who live within them. So we're hoping that... Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we're hoping that those people, regardless of age, regardless of experience, you can pick this up and be inspired, and it will influence you day to day, is the hope.
And wouldn't it be great when graduates go into the workplace as a part of their welcome pack, this book is in that pack? Wouldn't that be amazing? Paul, I'd like to ask you a question. 2020 was obviously a year which presented us with many challenges, but one of the challenges especially we had is the way that we work. And how did that impact your writing of the book?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was amazing because we had a session in October 2019 in a hotel in London where Cherie and I, Ali, my partner, Steve Bingle, who was working on the research of the book, and we were working through it pre-pandemic. So we had this whole idea of your organisation is alive, you're a living system. And even in January 2020, Cherie and I were I remember being on a subway in New York. It feels like a kind of world away now, travelling into kind of Brooklyn to meet some guy who was into kind of mystical experiences and consciousness, and we're kind of chatting about the book, and then all of a sudden the pandemic arrived, and we were like, whoa. And so it kind of pressed pause for everybody, so for us individually, for us as an organization, and we're still in that pause really. And we started thinking, is this book irrelevant? Has the book kind of become kind of what does it mean? So we just started reading through what we'd written. And I'd been going to the Fish Hotel, which is near here, to do little mini writing retreats. And actually what we started to realize was the book felt kind of a little weirdly prescient, because we were saying organizations were alive, and now organizations and leaders were saying to all of their workforce, we need to look after all of you, essential workers, knowledge workers, mobile workers, and actually we need to treat you as living organisms. And so we then started, if you like, looking at it through a COVID lens, and started to bring in COVID-related experiences, like what the restaurant chain, the hotel, food chain, Leon were doing, working with lots of other food chains, distributing food to NHS workers. Claridge is opening their hotel for key workers. And then all of these terms coming into the world of work. And I was talking to different leaders in different organizations, whether it's Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Estee Lauder, and they were all talking about terms I'd never heard them talk about. Vulnerability, empathy, listening. Who are we? Why are we here? And actually it felt like we'd kind of got a book that felt relevant, and probably not that we'd wished it to come out right now as we start to hopefully emerge out of the worst of the pandemic. But at least if there's a time when you need a new story of work for a living age, I think it's now.
Thank you. Cherie, I'm going to ask you a question, actually. As a result of writing the book, are there any long-held views that you had that suddenly you had to revisit and change your mind about?
That is a great question. I think it makes me reflect on when I entered the world of work. And after I graduated just after 2008, so just into the financial crisis. And I remember my first experiences of work always feeling very mechanic in a way. My relationship with work was very mechanic, and I think mechanistic, and very much about that side of things, and almost transactional, even though I've learned so much. And I think this process of doing the book, doing the research, doing the writing, the conversations around it, would have made me rethink. If I've had it back then, I would have approached work completely differently. That's why I say I think the idea of graduates and younger people just coming in, being able to read this is hugely impactful. And I would say it's made me reassess my relationship with work completely. If I think about some of the ideas like habitats, like relationships, like if I think about the migration topic and about intelligence, it's made me, I think some things that I knew rationally but maybe didn't necessarily feel deeply about technology, about our relationship with nature, those things have totally recalibrated, I think. And so the way that I approach workspaces is now completely different, and it's very much influenced by things like the habitats element. And so I think if you're an author, you're changed in the process of writing, as well as if you're a reader, you can be changed through the process of reading. But I think that influence on me has been unsuspected. Like, I didn't expect that to happen, but it's been huge and enjoyable.
Okay, thank you. Paul, did you want to give your thought about that?
It's a really great question. It's made me realise Guy Singh-Watson, who's the CEO of Riverford, the kind of organic vegetable home delivery company, turned his company into an employee ownership trust. So he decided not to sell the whole company for really quite a lot of money, but to actually release the ownership to the employees of the company and to benefit somewhat financially from that. And it made me realize that the goal of business is not simply for commercial success. And actually there's a world that includes that, but goes beyond it, where you're actually providing purpose to yourself, to your co-workers, to your clients, And so we as an organisation, and this wasn't something I expected pre-writing the book, is to look at becoming an employee-owned company. You know, we've had different offers to buy the company from different organisations, and I've realised as CEO of the Digital Workplace Group, that's not what I want to do. I want to release the ownership of the company to the employees of the company and to participate and create legacy into the future. And I think there's a more expanded view of what health for an organisation looks like beyond the narrow confines. I mean, it's interesting, the word economics, eco means home and nomics means management. And so economics means the management of home. And we've reduced it to the management of money. And I think a lot of things have been shown and revealed their weaknesses this year. And I think that one of them is the limitations of the industrial, quite narrow economic model.
Okay, thank you. I love the idea of the elements, but I wonder that as you wrote those elements, do you think who owns those elements? Were they departmentalized, or do we all own those elements to make sure they work? Cherie.
So we actually had this conversation during the writing of the book, which was, do we, as part of the structure, want to map each element to, for example, a department? So habitats, is that for real estate and facilities? Migration, is that for the HR department, for example? And we decided explicitly against taking that viewpoint, because what we realized was, as soon as you silo each element to a particular function, you're slipping almost back into that factory mindset of being able to have things up as separate parts, and each person belongs, is responsible for each. Whereas instead, what we're trying to say is that they're all connected. And actually, if you approach them all as a collective, you're going to be much more powerful and impactful, and you're going to be able to have that shared conversation. So if you take the idea of biodiversity, for example, HR aren't just responsible for that. Actually, it's infused throughout the whole organization at all levels. Everybody has a responsibility to make an organization which is welcoming, where people feel they belong, where people are who are from a whole multitude of different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, are able to feel welcome and able to collaborate and contribute. And so while I think there will be functions that are possibly drawn to more elements than others, as soon as you go down that path, I think you're losing the power of the impact that is possible.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Cherie. I'm just going to throw in a question that's come in from YouTube for you, Paul, actually, which is, were there any influences outside of the world of work that influenced the way that you wrote this book and your thoughts, Paul?
Well, definitely my own, as I said at the beginning, I think my own immersion in nature. I mean, I think through spending so much time in nature, it's changed me as a person. And I think I was very influenced by somebody called Charles Eisenstein, who's an environmental philosopher. He spoke about as being between stories. He sort of explained the politics of 2016 as being one story was ending and a new story hadn't yet come into being. And I really started to think about the idea of trying to, if you like, bring new language, a more poetic way of thinking and communicating into work. I also got very influenced by it I did at the IMF in 2019. And just being in this organization that had said, we were founded just after the Second World War, along with the United Nations and other entities like the World Health Organization. And we came to we knew what our purpose was. And as we come into a period in the 21st century where climate change is so much the key issue for people like the IMF, what's our purpose going to become? And I thought organizations are in a state of flux, and something that feels like a future story is going to have new language to it. So it's trying to have the courage to try and bring new language into the world.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a couple of... Sorry, go on. Go ahead, Cherie.
I was just going to say, if it's okay to share as well, I think in terms of some of my influences, was a bit of sci-fi, if I'm honest. If you've read books like Autonomous or Women on the Edge of Time, they look to a future where technology, the environment, humankind have moved beyond where we are today, for better or worse, depending on which you take. So I think, and I remember speaking to a colleague of ours called Elle Vargas at DWG 24, I think last year, and she was talking about the importance of sci-fi and why we should all be science fiction writers. And so I think those influences, as well as nature books like Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are, were a big influence on me as well during the writing of the book.
And Mark, you can hear because Cherie's answers are so much more eloquent and enjoyable and lucid than mine. Why it's such a pleasure to write a book.
And she has a great gamer's headset, which gives away a sci-fi theme. So I'm going to ask you a couple of personal questions. My world is a lot about the physical workplace, which is why I love that habitat section. Very, very quickly, both of you, what kind of physical environment suits you best to work in? Cherie, let's start with you.
Not the flat that I haven't been able to leave for the last year. No, it very much varies. I think there are so many different aspects that impact, I think, habitat, from smell to sound and all the rest. So I think my best habitat changes depending on the task that I'm doing, which I think is true for loads of us. So sometimes I will be in the corner of our living room with music playing and all the rest, and that's perfect for where I am. I think the habitats I've missed most over the last year are places like the British Library, where actually you have buzz around you, you have that collegiate kind of feel, and that can impact, I think, how you work best is that kind of environment.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and I'd say the thing that I've found the power of most in the last year is not the digital workplace, but actually a longing for the physical workplace. I never thought I'd feel so passionately about some of the buildings that I used to go into. And it's not that I long for the office again, not that we have any offices, but I kind of long for the physical connection with other people. And actually this year's sort of revealed, or the last year has revealed to me, not so much the strength of the digital workplace, but some of its limitations. And I think where I feel most comfortable is just having that kind of movement, that variety, and that ability to choose where we work.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on pretty soon, but before we go, in 10 years' time, I'm doing a presentation, if I'm still working, and I'm quoting from the book because I'm so impressed by it. Tell me, each of you, which quote would you like me to have up on my slide deck in 10 years' time that kind of encapsulate what you want to think of? Paul, start with you.
So the quote for me would be kind of a distillation of what we say at the beginning, which is not that your organisation became alive, it's that you're already alive. But actually you didn't see yourself, a bit like a lens coming into focus. And that there are 3.2 billion people in work. And if you change the world of work, you change the way we live. And I would hope, I suppose this would be the dream, is that people say this book was part of a moment, perhaps along with other influences, that spoke to a kind of moment in time where organisations and work were looking for a new direction, a new story.
Thank you. Cherie, your quote.
So mine is taken from the intelligence element, and it reads, "In creating a hierarchy of intelligence with mindless nature at the bottom, ourselves in the middle, and the aspiration of intelligent machines at the top, we've placed ourselves at the centre of a tug-of-war of our own making. Instead, we have the opportunity to discover a more rich, complex view of what intelligence is, flowing from an understanding of our own intelligence as part of nature and the intelligence of machines as part of us." So it's very much about reclaiming this idea of AI and robots and all the rest being the aspiration of technology and progress, and instead kind of rediscovering what intelligence is as being a crucial part of nature, and then ourselves as being a part of nature.
Thank you for that. That was a goosebump moment for me. Thank you for that. Seriously, superb. Well, we've heard from the authors, so let's hear, if we can, an excerpt from the audiobook to be read by Helen Lloyd. Thank you. Thank you, guys. You've done great so far.
Welcome to Nature of Work. Your organisation and the world of work in which you spend so much of your life are alive. But for years, decades, centuries even, we have behaved as though this wasn't the case. We have acted as if organisations and work are machines, mechanistic systems that can be programmed down to the last cog or circuit board. And in approaching our organisations as machines, we have treated the people who work within them likewise, as part of those machines. Clock in, clock out, leave your feelings at the door, be efficient, get the job done. While this mindset has spurred huge growth and riches for many, it's an approach that has masked a fundamental truth. Rather than a machine, your organisation is a living, dynamic system that can't be programmed. Instead, it thrives through relationships, adaptive structures, diverse networks of people, the spaces they occupy, the tools they use, the knowledge and intelligence they pulsate with, and so much more. It's a community of people working together and seeking to achieve great things that as individuals they couldn't dream of doing alone, with no one day exactly the same as the day before, because we aren't exactly the same today as we were yesterday. We think, we feel, we hurt, we play. Together, we are the organizations within which we work. The decisions we make, the challenges we face, the things we create, as well as those we destroy, define us. So, what story should we use to describe this living system of work and its elements? What language can we create to allow us to start to talk about it and think about it in new and different ways? How can we break away from the language and story of industrialization inherited from generations past and evolve forward in our own way? For Paul and Cherie and DWG, the answer is nature of work, a new language inspired by forests and other elements of the natural world. This new vocabulary helps us to perceive work in a more dynamic way, to move away from the organization as machine model and towards an organization as organism view. As our species, along with the many other creatures with whom we share the planet Earth, face ever more complex challenges and crises, whether through the climate emergency, global pandemics, or social injustices, the language and stories of nature can help us better understand ourselves, each other, and this whole world on which we all so deeply rely and which we so profoundly impact. This is Nature of Work. And through these pages, we invite you to embark on this journey towards a more natural understanding of your working world, not alone, but together with us, and in this way, to see your own working life as well as that of your colleagues in a new light. This is no longer the industrial age, or even the digital age, but the living age. We hope Nature of Work will become more of a shared movement than a preset blueprint. Welcome to Nature of Work. You're organised.
Well, thank you very much. And what we're going to do now, we're actually going to invite some guests into the virtual studio, some people who've read advanced copies of the book, to give us their reflections and put their questions to the authors. And at the same time, we are seeing some of your questions coming in, so I will try to get them before the end of the session to Paul and Cherie. But first up, I'd like to invite Tori Pullman to join us. Tori is Director Global IT Client Services at Pegasystems. Tori, welcome. You're one of those lucky people who've received an advanced copy of Nature of Work. Tell us, what were your thoughts about it?
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. And I also really want to double down that this is a really beautiful book. As you can tell, I'm here in America, so I hope it translates that this has become a coffee table book in my home, one that you can just pick up and look at the pictures even. Now, I wanted to start by saying that for many years, I feel like our industry was really obsessed with the digital transformation. And what really drew me to Digital Workplace Group is that I felt like this organization is really shifting the conversation to the employee and the people at the center, because it's my belief that employee experience, that we need to go even deeper and look at the human experiences of connection and belonging. And so what I really love about this book is that it really breathes life into the human elements of it. So, for example, one thing I even talked about last week was the chapter on habitat. Now, I realize, like Paul was talking about, like before this period of remote working, if you asked me, I would have told you I had to do all my best work in the office. I just was that type of person. But this has really given me an opportunity to reflect on where I do my best work, and you guys talk a lot about that. And for me, it's allowed me to dive deeper into the introspection that I did around, where I work is relative. That habitat in which I do my best work can be flexible. For example, when I want to focus on reading and writing, I've got this little found table behind me that's got plants on it, and that's a place where I can ground down, much like Cherie is talking about doing in the library. And by the way, one little bonus is that I've gone from plant killer to nurturer, which is a great experience for me in my life. But one other thing that really resonated for me, it was this chapter around purpose, because I think we all know that generations that are coming into our workforce, especially in the last 5 years, like really crave purpose really deeply. So it's relevant to our ability to attract and retain this diverse workforce. But more importantly, and you explore this in the role of collaboration tools, which many of us in the digital workplace are a big part of shepherding, is driving that human connection and belonging. I think we need a lot of attention on that in 2021, especially as workplaces explore what the future of work looks like for them, whether they're going to be back in the office, and there was a question about that I saw on the YouTube channel, or they're going to find fully remote or fully hybrid. And one analogy that I picked up from the book and I'm just loving is this idea of fruit and seeds. And I think it's in that purpose section, and it's stripped around. But if you think about driving social connection and fulfilling that human need for human connection, and you think about it like the fruit is the enjoyable part. Maybe you're creating a channel that feels like social. It's sweet, it's craveable. It can feel superfluous sometimes when you're trying to legitimize it, but it's carrying it's there to protect and proliferate the seeds. So if you think more about using your collaboration tools from this analogy, and it's so delicious, I love it. It's easier kind of to justify creating these informal or social spaces to really meet your business needs. So those are two, I think I've just turned those right into business capabilities out of the book.
Thank you. And not many people, when they're reading a book, get the opportunity that you're about to get is to ask the authors questions. So fire away.
Yeah. I'm going to lob my hardest one at you because we've talked a lot about how beautiful this book is. I love all of the animals. I love the representation of art or of animals in nature. I'm one of the people that loved that movie Baraka and watch it over and over again. So I would love to, my hard-hitting question of the day is, which of these adorable animal pictures are your favorite and why? Why were they chosen?
Should I go first, Paul?
Yeah, okay. So mine is the axolot salamander.
I was going to pick the same one.
I love that one.
Oh, we
I got a different one.
share notes. And which I've now discovered can generate entirely new limbs to replace those that have been damaged. I think what's interesting is that, and we found this, is that when you then start to think of that through an organizational lens, so some parts of your service set get degraded. I mean, we've seen this shift from physical retail to online retail. So when one thing gets depleted, something else can get created. And that you don't actually get necessarily destroyed, that you actually can create new and afresh. And at this point, Tori, and by the way, thank you so much for your thoughtful and lovely comments. That would be my favourite animal. Cherie, I can't get the same one as you. I can't believe it. That's
okay. My second favourite would be this beaver. I think, learning more about beavers during the course of the research and just how impactful they are for biodiversity, for the environment, and the impact that just reintroducing them into the wild can have on an ecosystem was a lovely story and an important story, I think. And I think if we're thinking about regeneration for our organisations, there's so much that can be learned from that around what are we missing that we can reintroduce to our organisations that can potentially help us regenerate, especially now. Plus, they're lovely.
Tori, can we have one more question for you? For the sake of time, we're going to stick to 2 questions rather than 3. But
absolutely, I was gonna ask if I could have one more.
Absolutely.
Right, so my second question is, in habitats, you talk about creating habitats that build strong relationships. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is our backgrounds, what's happening in our backgrounds, and how that there's challenges around equity and challenges around privacy and things like that, but also this really great opportunity of sending signals about who you are and what you value. I have seen times this year where this has sort of backfired, such as like an executive streaming from their like super extravagant house, or their beach house over the summer. So what would you offer insight to leaders on how to leverage this really important capability without appearing to be either disconnected or performative? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can pick that up. I mean, I think it's about this much overused word of authenticity. So, I mean, a new story of work requires new stories of leaders in work. And I don't think it's that people want them to disguise maybe greater economic success at that point in their lives, etc., but have something that's reflective of you as a person. And you don't need to kind of necessarily, apologize for that, but just bring that in, but be thoughtful of the fact that quite a lot of your workforce are in places that are not going to be as suitable as yours. And just, if you like, bring more of your own true self.
I would add to that as well. I think one of the things we talk about in, the relationships element is the idea of power dynamics, and the impact of power on relationships and the impact of trust on relationships. We also talk about the importance of feedback loops. So if you are a leader who is in that position where you are streaming from your opulent surroundings, I think if you have those things in the back of your mind, the power dynamics, the relationship you have with your employees, the feedback loop, so that you know what kind of environment your people are in or how they feel, that should hopefully counter anything where you're accidentally projecting something that is possibly more harmful than good in those situations as well.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you again for the invite to be here and the pre-read. I feel quite lucky.
Tori, thank you very much for joining us. That's excellent. Thank you. We're going to move on to our next guest in the studio, the virtual studio. Sue Pitkin-Frost is going to join us. She's director at 21st Century Performance. So if we could bring Sue into the studio, that would be great. Thank you. Hi, Sue. Welcome to the studio. Give us your thoughts, having read the book, and then fire your questions away. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me today. I wish I had a backdrop. I mean, you can see everyone needs a nature of work backdrop to make their office much more appealing. So thank you. I mean, the first time I read the book, it was in electronic form, and after that I commented on the amazing visuals and imagery and how that helped evolve elements. And all I can say is actually getting the book in hardback, it is even more impressive. For me, what's so beautiful about it is how the book flows, and using nature to tell a story seems to make it very memorable but very personable. just really building what Tori was saying there, how you connect with it whilst thinking about the challenges of the workplace, the future of the workplace. It seems to bring it close to the heart, and it very definitely is a book touched my heart. And it also challenges you, and I think that is really interesting. It challenges you in a non-judgmental way, and it is about looking through a new lens. I think Paul mentioned it earlier. You know, everything is there in our organisations, but how do we look through a new lens and see where you can make a difference? There's a definite connection through this book with your personal purpose, linking to organisational purpose. And I really love it. I really like that. I mean, the concept of nature, very close to me, and love the concept of building change makers, a movement. I think that is something which is also a great ambition of the book, you know, to change the world. This movement of change makers across organisations is fantastic.
Hey, thank you, Sue. Please fire your questions. Can we have 2 of your questions, if that's okay? Go with your first one. Fire away.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'll pick the first one. So basically, why the nature of work now? I hope you like what I'm doing there. And how near to now are we?
Do you want to pick that up, Cherie?
Why the nature of work now? I think for so many reasons it's needed now. I feel like as a species and as a planet we're at a crossroads. And the next steps that we choose to take are going to be so important as for the future of the species, for the planet, for next generations. And so the story that we carry with us as we kind of start on whichever path we're going to choose is going to influence our behaviour. And so if we're carrying with us the story of the nature of work, which is a story of connection, of relationship, of being more mindful about resource use, about how we connect with one another, about how we impact one another, the responsibilities that we have to each other, that is going to carry us forward in a very different way as opposed to taking a path of just being, you know, chasing the next bit of technology, the next bit of success, the next bit of everything. So for me, that's why nature of work now. It's because we have choices that we have to make, and that we shouldn't be shying away from.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'd say, I mean, you're a sports person, an athlete, Sue, and you know that moment where the goal's open, you've got an opportunity, and I think we all collectively know, brought around through the global pandemic, that there's a window of opportunity for organisations to change in fundamental ways. They're asking themselves, who do we want to be as we emerge out of the pandemic? What kind of organisation do we want to be? So it really is decision time. And I think once we came across this idea of connecting the world of nature and the world of work, it felt like a kind of a moment of exhilaration, because it was a metaphor that's around us, that and actually we need to move as a species from a dysfunctional to a functional relationship with the earth. And any organisation tuned into this, including DWG, has to play its part in that. And if not now, when?
Exactly. Thank you. So my second question, and it's going to be my final one, and Paul, it was sort of reflecting on your podcast, where you always end with, when you ask your guests, what's a good day for you? And if we put the nature of work hat on and the metaphor of a wood, my question for you both is, what tree do you resonate with?
So I'm going to talk about, there's a couple of trees on a walk that I go on, and they both look a bit like human lungs. And in this past year, when I lost 2 people very close to me, I was looking at the tree and kind of, in a way, talking to the 2 people I lost. And it's a way that we can connect back into that which we love through the nature around us. So I don't know what type of tree it is. I'm not brilliant at that kind of thing, but I know that I love this tree.
Fantastic.
For me, it's the weeping willow. In my primary school, in our playground, it doesn't exist anymore, but there was this gorgeous, huge weeping willow that we would used to sit underneath. And it felt safe, and it felt connected to nature, and it felt like you were enclosed in a little world. And the weeping willow ever since then has just resonated with me as something that feels very comforting, very nostalgic, and very nurturing, I think. So yeah, the weeping willow for me.
Lovely, thank you.
Sue, thank you very much for those insightful questions, and that's fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to put a question to Paul and Shimrit, if I may, from the YouTube channel before we move on to the next session, which I think is a really interesting one. It kind of going to bring you down to earth, I think. Your new approach to work is challenging and laudable, but can you say anything about the likely return to shareholders if firms adopt your new approach, or am I missing the point?
Great question. Yes, you're missing the point. And if you look at BlackRock, which I think is the largest fund investor in the world, several $1 trillion, and what they've said is if your return to shareholders is your only group that you're going to service, then we're not going to invest in you. So you have to have a social, economic, environmental conscience and support those groups. And if you don't support all of those groups, you're going to become uninvestable. So actually what we're starting to see is you can. I mean, Mindful Chef's a great example. They, I think, are a very nature work company. They also recently got bought by Nestle, who are one of our clients. Nestle itself's on its own journey. Some people would criticize them. Some people think they're really good. They're a company like a lot of large organizations are in transition. So I think you can, if you like, have all of the, you can get the commercial benefits, but you can get all the other benefits as well. And the two will come together.
Yeah, I think during the research, we found things like organizations that are more adaptive, and we talk about adaptive structures in the book, organizations that kind of operate from a place of purpose actually also perform better financially. So it doesn't necessarily need to be either or if that's the case that you need to make, but ultimately it's about being a more resilient, a more adaptive organization, about attracting good talent, about being able to keep good talent, and all those things are just going to improve your performance as well. But yeah, it's missing the point of it as well. But it's also, I would question, who are your shareholders in a sense? Who are your stakeholders? Yes, they're the people who own a part in the company, but it's also the families of your employees. It's the people who are your suppliers and in your supply chain. And so how are they also being positively impacted by the changes that can be made as a result of following some of the recommendations and ideas in the book?
Thank you very much. And I love that question because I want to throw in a quote from the founder of the company I work for, Herman Miller. He said this, that in the long run, businesses and business leaders should not be judged on their products or their profits, but on their impact on humanity. And I absolutely love that quote. It really does bring it back to more than just being shareholder value. So we've had some fantastic questions. I'm going to put a burden on Paul that what he will do following this is do a podcast where he will pick up on some of the questions that have been asked and answer some of those in a podcast. So there you are, Paul. There's add that to your to-do list because we've got some fantastic questions, but we just haven't been able to pick them up. So thank you very much. It's been enlightening listening to Paul and Shimrit's vision for the new story of work for a living age. And the story is going to continue in 21 as the Digital Workplace Group have another exciting announcement to make. So this is where I hand over to Paul. Paul,
Great.
Over to you.
Thank you. So if the book wasn't enough already, a strange thing happened in the last quarter of 2020, and we got approached by a large event company in the US called Questx. They're across Europe and North America. And they got very interested in the book and the nature of work. And we had some conversations, and we now have responded to a request they had, which was for us to produce with them a festival based on the book called, guess what? The Nature of Work Festival. So I'm now going to bring in Alexi from Questx. And hi, Alexi. And you're going to explain to us this crazy thing that we've come up with for September this year.
Indeed, crazy. Well, first of all, Paul, thanks and congratulations on the book. We're truly excited to embark on this journey in partnership with DWG to launch the Nature of Work Festival. Perhaps a few words about us. Questx, our mission at Questx is to help people live longer and live better. And we do that by focusing on the experience economy. So bringing Paul's book to life and creating a virtual and live festival around the nature of work fits quite naturally with our company's mission. So it was said earlier, but probably worth saying again that 2020 has turned the world of work upside down. Yet in the conversations, Paul, that we've had and with the DWG team, we agreed that it has only accelerated what was to come. And there are so many challenges that we are now faced with, not just keeping the lights on, to the point of, shareholder profits and so forth, but really on ensuring the health and productivity of our people, place, and technology are fit for purpose. And that really is the hardest task that business leaders and frankly all of us face today in creating a community and in being able to create that community of creatives as well as thought leaders and others that, the issues that are brought forth in the book to collaboratively discuss and resolve these issues in a timely way is such an important thing to do. And we're very excited to bring the Nature of Work Festival to fruition in September of this year.
So just take us through the cities it's going to happen in and how it's going to happen.
Yeah, the idea is quite creative. The festival will take place across 5 days and across 5 cities. So the cities are Singapore, Berlin, London, New York, and San Francisco. And we'll be creating a first of its kind hybrid event experience. As we've all talked about, we've all gone through a year where we weren't in the physical environment, we weren't able to collaborate and be with coworkers and so forth. So what we're doing is combining live and hybrid with a live broadcast of content. There will be the keynotes, interviews, roundtables, master classes, and then obviously that in-person networking, which I think many of us have just been striving so much for. And then all of that will be sort of day one in Singapore. The folks in Singapore will then have a day two where teams will be collaborating together, working with thought leaders as well as practitioners. And then it will move on from Singapore to the next city, whether that be San Francisco or London. So it's a very creative approach. It's a global approach to, frankly, the nature of work as a global issue. So it's quite an interesting platform. We're very excited.
Yeah, it's going to be so terrific, isn't it, Alexi, to be in person and virtual in September in what you call biosecure environments. Indeed. So we're, as somebody said, we're emerging into a new world of work and into a new world. And to do that, we need to come together physically and virtually. And DWG is really delighted to partner with Questx on this festival.
Yeah, what I think we find to be so timely, but also so interesting, is that people really are yearning for the collaborative approach. There's no question that communication has happened. In fact, in many cases, it's happened. More communication is happening. But where I think people and businesses and and entities are struggling is within that collaboration part. So by bringing people together in both a live environment as well as through a hybrid environment, so that remote people can engage with people that are on site, or two people that are remote in two different time zones can also engage with one another, I think is very reflective of the current environment and, frankly, the environment in which we're all migrating into.
That's great. So please do register your interest at nowfestival.com. And we see the book, the festival, as part of a movement and a journey that we're all on. And register your interest and be part of the community and be part of this movement. Thank you, Alexei.
Thanks, Paul.
Mark, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. It sounds like a really interesting event, very exciting year for the nature of work. And we're going to draw this to a close. So Paul and Cherie, if Cherie could come back into the studio as well, that would be really good. I just want to say thank you, both of you, for an outstanding book and an outstanding session, and thank you for putting up with me and the questions. But I want to thank Alexei and the rest of those that joined us in the studio, but especially to all of you that have joined us on YouTube. Let this be the beginning of a conversation that goes on and on and on. But you can buy your copy of Nature of Work at the website, which is natureofwork.com. And you can continue the Nature of Work. Yeah, absolutely. I did. I forgot. There it is. Yeah, I can't quite work it out. There it is. Above me there. I know it's very hard. And also head over to the festival website, nowfestival.com, to register your interest. And links to both of those sites are going to be added in the comments panel as well on YouTube. I just want to say a great big thank you to everyone. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cherie. And of course, instead of shaking hands now, we just all wave goodbye. I think that's the tend to be what we do. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to hearing more about the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.